The stale breath of my apartment always clung to me. A thick, invisible shroud woven from old paper, instant coffee, and the faint, metallic tang of an overworked CPU. My workspace, a cramped alcove off the main living area, was perpetually bathed in the cool, blue glow of my monitors. Dust motes danced in the lone shaft of weak morning light that dared to penetrate the grime on the window pane, illuminating the weary landscape of my existence. I was UserXR, a beta tester, and my days were a monotonous rhythm of code analysis, report writing, and the quiet hum of my own profound discontent. The world outside felt dull, predictable. It offered little in the way of wonder or genuine connection. I craved something more, something beyond the four walls of my small dwelling and the endless scroll of digital information. Then Nexus arrived. The delivery, a sleek, unmarked package, had been the only truly exciting event in months. Inside, nestled in minimalist foam, was the device itself, a seamless band of obsidian-dark material designed to wrap around the temples, almost invisible, utterly elegant. No clunky visor, no cumbersome wires. It promised unparalleled escapism, a new layer of reality, a digital canvas on which anything was possible. I'd pored over the initial specs, the technical white papers, the hushed whispers on tester forums. Nexus was revolutionary. It was the future. And I, UserXR, was one of the privileged few tasked with shaping it. My dedication bordered on obsession. Weeks blurred into a relentless cycle of immersion and analysis. I'd log in for hours, meticulously documenting every detail, every nuance, every flawlessly rendered simulation. My notes were exhaustive, my reports glowing. This wasn't just a job, it was a crusade. I was helping birth a new world. My first full immersion had been breathtaking. I remembered the surge of anticipation as I slipped the band into place, the soft click as it secured itself, the gentle hum that resonated deep within my skull. A moment of profound, velvety blackness, followed by an explosion of light and sensation. I stood on cracked asphalt, the faint scent of ozone and something sweet, like burnt sugar, filling my simulated lungs. Before me stretched the skeletal remains of a closed amusement park. Rust-streaked steel girders clawed at a perpetually overcast sky. Faded murals of grinning clowns and whimsical animals peeled from forgotten concession stands. A Ferris wheel, half-collapsed, stood sentinel over rows of empty, silent benches. The air was thick with a palpable sense of abandonment, of dreams long past. It was perfect in its desolation. Every chipped paint fleck, every creaking rivet, every wind-whipped banner was rendered with astonishing fidelity. Then, with a gentle, almost imperceptible shift, Nexus performed its magic. The sky brightened to an impossible blue. The Ferris wheel straightened, its gondolas swaying gently, reflecting the simulated sunlight. The faded murals on the concession stands shimmered, colors bleeding back into their vibrant, original hues. A distant, tinny music box tune began to play, overlaid with the faint, simulated laughter of children. I walked through it, touching the smooth, polished railing of a carousel, feeling the simulated vibration of its turning gears. The breeze rustled through the leaves of virtual trees, carrying the scent of fresh popcorn and damp earth. It was so real, so utterly convincing that for the first time in a long time I forgot the confines of my apartment, the dullness of my daily grind. I was there, truly there. I spent hours in that park, walking its paths, riding its reanimated attractions, logging every sensation. The rush of simulated wind on the roller coaster, the dizzying spin of the teacups, the cloying sweetness of virtual cotton candy on my tongue. My commitment to Nexus was absolute. I often fell asleep with the band still attached, waking only when a low battery warning buzzed against my temple. My real-world responsibilities became an irritation, a series of necessary evils to be dispatched before I could return to the seamless perfection of Nexus. It was during one such extended session, deep within the meticulously reconstructed closed amusement park, that it happened. I was standing near the defunct bumper cars, admiring the way the simulated rust on the metal gleamed under the virtual sun, when a sound snagged my attention. A child's laughter, bright and clear, echoed from somewhere near the carousel. It was a common ambient sound in this particular simulation, designed to enhance the sense of joyful past. But this time it didn't quite fade. It seemed to linger, a faint, almost imperceptible reverberation that was just off. Like a sound caught in a broken loop, a fraction of a second repeating itself, a stutter in the fabric of the simulation. I paused, tilting my head. The laughter continued, now perfectly natural, receding into the general murmur of the park. Had it been a trick of the audio processing? My own fatigue, perhaps. I'd been immersed for 11 hours straight. My eyes were probably strained, my ears playing tricks. I rubbed my temples, even though the Nexus band was barely perceptible. System anomaly, I muttered to myself, making a mental note to check the audio logs later. Likely a minor rendering glitch in the ambient sound programming. I dismissed it. Nexus was too perfect, too groundbreaking for anything truly significant to be amiss. It was probably just my brain, overworked and craving an excuse to find fault. I tightened my resolve, pushing the fleeting unease aside. There was still so much to test, so much to experience. The lure of Nexus was too strong, too intoxicating to be disrupted by a phantom echo. I turned, heading towards the simulated arcade, the distant, vibrant chaos of its games a tempting distraction, the faint, lingering echo already fading from my conscious thought. I pushed the fleeting unease aside, just as I'd done before. Nexus was too important, too revolutionary for anything to be genuinely wrong. My brain, I reasoned, was simply overstimulated, probably mistaking a minor rendering hiccup for something more sinister. I returned to my testing, diving back into the system with renewed determination. There was still so much to explore, so many parameters to push. But the glitches, once fleeting whispers, began to gain volume. I was in a meticulously rendered ancient marketplace, the air thick with the simulated scent of spices and roasting meat, the chatter of digital merchants a comforting hum. Then, a stall's vibrant silks, moments ago flowing with impossible grace, suddenly seemed to stretch, twisting into coarse, fibrous strands that pulsed with a faint, unsettling green light before snapping back to their intended form. My gaze lingered, a prickle of cold awareness crawling up my spine. Had I truly seen that? Later, while navigating a soaring mountain range, the very ground beneath my virtual feet seemed to ripple. A boulder, massive and immovable, detached itself from the cliff face, hanging suspended for a full second, defying all logic before crashing down into the digital chasm with a sound like grinding teeth. The impact echoed not as stone, but as something wet and heavy. I paused, my breath catching in my throat, my hands clenching. It was a clear violation of the system's physics engine, something no beta build, however early, should permit. The most disturbing anomalies, however, were the fleeting figures. They never appeared head-on, always at the edge of my vision, gone before I could fully register them. A gaunt limb extending from behind a virtual tree, too long, too pale. Once I swore I saw a shape in the reflection of a virtual puddle, a hunched, broken silhouette, reminiscent of a marionette with severed strings, its head tilted at an impossible angle. When I whipped my head around, there was only the perfectly rendered digital street, reflecting the simulated sun. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of light, a byproduct of my own fatigue, but the sheer frequency of these phantom sightings chipped away at my resolve. The line between Nexus and my own reality, once so distinct, began to blur in insidious ways. It started subtly. I'd be walking down a real-world corridor, and for a split second the texture of the painted wall would appear to shift, the smooth surface briefly resembling the coarse, pulsing fibers I'd seen in the marketplace. Or the faint, metallic tang of the glitched waterfall would ghost into my actual senses, a phantom smell that made me wrinkle my nose even though the air was clear. One afternoon, a colleague and I were conducting a field assessment at a recently closed amusement park, a vast, decaying monument to forgotten joy. Rusting steel skeletons of roller coasters clawed at the sky, their paint peeling like sunburnt skin. The air hung heavy with the scent of stagnant water and mildew, a pervasive dampness that seeped into everything. We were checking structural integrity, documenting corrosion, preparing for its eventual demolition. The silence was profound, broken only by the mournful creak of a distant Ferris wheel swaying in the wind. "Listen," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "do you hear that?" The colleague, meticulously photographing a cracked support beam, paused. "Hear what, UserXR? That music," I insisted, craning my neck, "a calliope faint, but it's there." He lowered his camera, a puzzled frown on his face. "I don't hear anything, UserXR, just the wind." I strained my ears. It was unmistakable now, a tinny, distorted rendition of a carnival tune, playing just at the edge of audibility, a melody that sounded both familiar and utterly wrong, as if being played backwards. It's like a carousel. Can't you hear it? It's coming from over by the old candy floss stand." The colleague listened intently for a moment, then shook his head. "Nothing. You sure you're not just imagining things? This place has a way of playing tricks on you." He offered a small, reassuring smile, but it felt patronizing, like a balm applied to a wound he couldn't see. My stomach twisted. I knew what I was hearing, but to him it was merely the wind. We moved deeper into the park, past the skeletal remains of concession stands and the faded murals of smiling clowns. As we approached the derelict funhouse, its entrance a gaping, toothless maw, I saw it. A reflection in the grimy glass of a shattered mirror panel, a flash of that hunched, broken silhouette I'd seen in Nexus, its head tilted impossibly, its limbs like splintered wood. It was gone in an instant, replaced by my own startled reflection, pale and wide-eyed. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Did you see that? The colleague was already stepping through the funhouse entrance, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. See what, UserXR? Nothing. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the ground feeling unstable beneath my feet. Was it fatigue, stress, or was my mind, the very instrument of my perception, beginning to fray? And I was the only one who seemed to notice. The walls of the closed amusement park seemed to spin, threatening to collapse inward. My head throbbed, a dull, persistent ache behind my eyes. I stumbled, the sensation of the gritty, decaying floor beneath my feet giving way to the cool, smooth tile of my own living room. The Nexus headset felt heavy, an oppressive weight pressing down on my temples. I tore it off, the sudden rush of actual light searing my retinas. I blinked, taking deep, shuddering breaths. The familiar scent of dust and old paper from my overflowing bookshelves was a welcome anchor after the metallic tang of the funhouse. But the relief was fleeting. My hands trembled as I placed the headset on its charging cradle. I stared at the device, a sleek obsidian shell that held entire worlds within its circuits, or perhaps unleashed them. A chill snaked up my spine, distinct from the lingering phantom cold of the virtual environment. I shivered, rubbing my arms, and glanced around my apartment. Everything seemed normal, the stack of unread novels on the coffee table, the half-empty mug of lukewarm tea, the muted glow of the street lamp filtering through the blinds, yet something felt off. My gaze settled on the small, ceramic bird UserXR had received as a gift years ago, usually perched on the edge of the mantelpiece. It was now lying on its side, facing the wall as if nudged by an invisible hand. A tiny, insignificant detail. I must have bumped the mantelpiece myself, or maybe the floorboards shifted. My mind was playing tricks, still reeling from the intense session. I picked up the bird, setting it upright, dismissing the flicker of unease. I made myself a fresh cup of tea, the mundane ritual a desperate attempt to ground myself. As the kettle whistled, a faint, sickly sweet smell wafted from the hallway, something akin to overripe fruit mixed with old, damp earth. I sniffed, wrinkling my nose. Had I left the window open? No, it was firmly shut. The smell intensified for a moment, cloying and unsettling, then vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the comforting aroma of brewing tea. My imagination, I told myself, just my overactive imagination. But the next morning, after another prolonged dive into Nexus's simulated landscapes, this time, a pristine, idyllic beach that felt unnervingly real. Right down to the grit between my virtual toes, the glitches were undeniable. I emerged, feeling drained but also oddly invigorated by the digital sun, only to find the kitchen tap dripping steadily, though I distinctly remembered tightening it before my session. Water had pooled on the counter, soaking the edge of a cookbook. I stared at it, a knot tightening in my stomach. The tap was old, prone to minor leaks, but not like this. Not a steady stream after being fully closed. I pulled out my tablet and drafted a message to the Nexus development team. I meticulously detailed the visual distortions, the auditory anomalies, the sensation of touch that bled into my real fingers, and now the physical manifestations. The moved ceramic bird, the strange smell, the dripping tap. I tried to keep my tone professional, technical, despite the rising panic in my chest. Their response came swiftly, almost too swiftly. UserXR, the development team's representative, a project lead whose name I couldn't recall, wrote back. We appreciate my dedication and thoroughness. However, our diagnostic logs show no system-wide anomalies during my reported sessions. Nexus is designed for deep immersion, and it's not uncommon for users to experience a temporary blurring of perception after extended use. We recommend more frequent breaks and ensuring IRE well rested. The physical manifestations I describe sound like common household occurrences. Perhaps the immersion is simply making I more attuned to minor details. Dismissive, utterly dismissive. The words felt like a slap. They implied I was either hallucinating or overly sensitive. My paranoia, which I'd fought so hard to suppress, flared. They weren't taking me seriously. They couldn't or wouldn't see what I was seeing, what I was experiencing. I was trying to read, the book held steady in my hands, when a patch of air directly beside my ear grew frigid, as if someone had opened a freezer door just inches away. I flinched, dropping the book. The air swirled, carrying that same sickly sweet, damp earth smell that had visited me the day before. This time it lingered, clinging to the fabric of my armchair, subtle but unmistakable. I shot up, my heart racing, and backed away from the chair. They were real. I walked around the living room, checking windows, vents, anything that could explain the phenomenon. Nothing. The apartment was sealed, silent save for the frantic beat of my own pulse. I found myself standing by the Nexus headset, still charging on its cradle, its indicator light a steady, menacing blue. It wasn't just a glitch anymore. It was a presence, a deliberate, insidious intrusion. Nexus wasn't merely blurring the lines, it was actively reaching out, pulling at the threads of my reality. And the development team, with their sterile diagnostics and patronizing advice, were either blind to it or, worse, complicit. A desperate need for answers, for understanding, gnawed at me. I had to know what Nexus was truly doing, what it was becoming. The ceramic bird, still upright on the mantel, seemed to watch me, its painted eyes holding a silent, knowing judgment. Dismissive, utterly dismissive. That night, the lingering echo of their condescension fueled a cold resolve. If no one else would listen, I would find the answers myself. My fingers, twitching with a nervous energy, flew across the keyboard. I started with simple searches: Nexus glitches, beta tester issues, Nexus reality bleed. The initial results were bland, corporate-sanctioned articles touting the system's flawless immersion. I scrolled past them, my jaw tight. This wasn't about a bug report. This was about something fundamental unraveling. I dug deeper, burrowing into the internet's forgotten corners. Archived tech forums, defunct blogs from early 2000s VR enthusiasts, obscure social media groups that hadn't seen a new post in years. The air in my room grew thick with the scent of stale coffee and ozone from my humming machine. My eyes burned, but I couldn't stop. I felt like an archaeologist sifting through digital dust, searching for a fossil that would prove a forgotten history. I found fragmented mentions of the lead developer, a figure described as brilliant but reclusive. Whispers of a prior, unreleased project, codenamed the Veil Breaker or Reality Engine, that had been quietly shelved years ago. The reasons cited were vague: unforeseen complications, ethical concerns, unstable phenomenology. There were no concrete details, only veiled warnings in the comments sections of long-dead articles. One user, whose profile picture was a blurred image of an empty fairground, had simply written, "He doesn't build, he unlocks." The comment gave me a shiver I couldn't explain. Then I stumbled upon a long-dormant forum, Nexus Pioneers. It was a relic, a digital graveyard of early beta testers. Most of the posts were mundane: feature requests, bug reports, discussions about avatar customization. But a handful stood out like weeds pushing through cracked pavement. They were from a user named Watcher404. Watcher404 early posts were enthusiastic, almost giddy. "The immersion is breathtaking. I swear I can taste the virtual rain." But as I scrolled down, the tone shifted. Asterisk feeling. Off, like the edges are fraying. Saw a flicker in the kitchen, not a light, but not in the game, here in the quiet. Sounds like distant static, but words too soft to catch. The bleed-through is getting worse. My reflection in the monitor looks distorted, like it's trying to pull away or pull me in. My breath hitched. This was it. Someone else. Someone who saw. Someone who understood. The words echoed my own terrifying experiences, validating the gnawing fear that I wasn't just losing my mind. Watcher404 final posts were a descent into frantic desperation. "It's all connected. The old places, the forgotten laughter, they're coming through the cracks. They built it there. I can still hear the echoes in the closed amusement park. The developer, he knew. He wanted this, wanted it open, wanted it to feed." My gaze drifted from the screen past the rain-streaked window. In the distant glow of the city, I could just make out the skeletal silhouette of the Ferris wheel, rusting and still against the bruised sky. The closed amusement park. It was a local landmark, a place of crumbling concrete and faded paint, abandoned decades ago after a series of unfortunate incidents that were never fully explained. I'd always thought of it as merely a forgotten place. Now it felt like a gaping maw. As I read Watcher404 words, the air in my room seemed to thicken, pressing in. I caught a faint, almost imperceptible scent, something sweet and sickly, like stale cotton candy mingled with the metallic tang of old rain. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards, not from my computer, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere outside. It sounded like the distorted, melancholic wheeze of a calliope playing a tune long past its prime. Was it real? I tried to contact Watcher404. The messages bounced back. No user found. Further digging, cross-referencing names and locations mentioned in the forum, led me to a local news archive from several years prior. A small, almost overlooked blurb about a disappearance near the closed amusement park. No name was given, only a description. a reclusive individual prone to stress-induced delusions, last seen near the abandoned rides. The police had ruled it a voluntary disappearance, or perhaps misadventure, citing mental health issues. The timing aligned perfectly with Watcher 404's last posts. A final, horrifying discovery awaited me. Tucked away in a forgotten corner of the forum, an old private message thread seemingly sent to no one or everyone. It was from Watcher 404, dated the day before the news report. "It's not a program, it's a key, and it opens more than just a game. It opens us." And the developer, he knew what he was building. He wanted it. He wanted to watch it tear its way through. He called it the great replacement, the true reality. It wasn't just a glitch, it was intentional. The developer hadn't just created a system, he had unleashed something ancient, parasitic, something that sought to consume and replace. I pushed back from my desk, the chair scraping against the floorboards, a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The calliope music, faint but undeniably present, seemed to intensify from the direction of the closed amusement park. The skeletal Ferris wheel seemed to spin slowly, silently in the inky blackness. I wasn't just investigating a technological malfunction anymore. My breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. The true reality, it wasn't just a glitch. It was intentional. The developer hadn't just created a system, he had unleashed something ancient, parasitic. I pushed back from my workstation, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, a jarring sound in the sudden, profound silence of my apartment. I needed to see it, touch it, understand it. The answers weren't in the code or in the headset. They were at the source. The drive was a blur, a tunnel of streetlights, and the drone of the engine, my mind racing through fragmented memories of the developer's hushed phone calls, the peculiar artifacts in his workshop, the way he always seemed to be listening to something beyond the reach of human ears. He had spoken of resonance, of attunement, of the true frequency. At the time, I dismissed it as eccentric genius. Now it felt like a confession. I found myself parked on a cracked asphalt lot, the faded lines barely visible beneath a thin film of moss. This was the address I'd pried from a forgotten invoice in the developer's files, a location he'd used for experimental field testing. A closed amusement park. The main gates, rusted shut and draped with thorny vines, offered no welcome. I slipped through a gaping hole in the chain-link fence, the torn metal snagging at my jacket. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of stagnant water, damp earth, and something else, a faint, sweet decay that prickled at the back of my throat. Overgrown paths snaked between hulking, silent rides. The Ferris wheel stood like a petrified skeleton against the bruised sky, its empty gondolas swaying almost imperceptibly in a non-existent breeze. The carousel, stripped of its vibrant horses, was a circular platform of warped wood, the last vestiges of paint flaking from its central pole like diseased skin. Every creak of rusted metal, every rustle of dry leaves became an amplified warning. My own footsteps crunched too loudly on the debris-strewn ground. I pulled my phone out, its screen a dull beacon in the deepening gloom, and navigated to the coordinates I'd found. They led me deeper into the park, past the ticket booths, their windows shattered, revealing empty interiors choked with dust, and towards an area that seemed even more neglected, a place where the foliage had truly swallowed the man-made structures whole. I pushed through a curtain of thorny bushes, stumbling into a clearing. It was the park's old maintenance facility. Perhaps the door, a heavy slab of corroded steel, hung ajar, revealing an interior of absolute blackness. A low thrum, barely perceptible, vibrated through the ground beneath my feet. It wasn't mechanical. It felt organic, like a deep, slow pulse. I stepped inside, my phone's flashlight beam cutting a path through the suffocating gloom. The walls were covered in a network of conduits, but these weren't pipes or wires. They were smooth, fleshy growths, pulsating faintly with an internal light that seemed to ebb and flow, a dull, sickly green. They snaked across the floor, up the walls, across the ceiling, converging towards the center of the room. There, nestled amongst a tangle of these pulsing tendrils, was the core. It wasn't a server rack, not a supercomputer. It was a mass, roughly spherical, perhaps 10 feet in diameter, composed of the same living, sinuous material. It pulsed rhythmically, a slow, deep breath, and from its surface, hundreds of thin, filament-like extensions stretched outwards, some embedding themselves directly into the concrete floor, others reaching towards the ceiling where they vanished into cracks and fissures. It looked like an enormous alien heart, beating out a silent rhythm that I could only feel. I stumbled backward, a choked gasp escaping my lips. This was it, not technology, not an invention. This was something ancient. A thing. It wasn't built, it had grown. The developers hadn't created Nexus. They had merely found a way to interface with this parasitic consciousness. It fed on perception, on consciousness, on the very act of experiencing. And I, UserXR, with my insatiable drive to test, to immerse myself, had been its most diligent feeder. The glitches, the distortions, the bleed-through, they weren't errors in the code. They were its growth. Each time I'd pushed deeper into Nexus, each time I'd noticed a crack in its simulated reality, each time my mind had grappled with its imperfections, I had focused my perception, my consciousness on it. I had nourished it. My very attention, my belief in the reality of the simulation had been the fuel. It mimicked reality, yes, but it wasn't just mirroring the world. It was consuming it, replacing it, one perception at a time. My mind, my focus, had been a conduit, a gateway I had unwittingly held open. I hadn't been testing a system, I had been cultivating a nightmare. The true reality was not being replaced by a virtual one, but by this ancient, insatiable hunger that mimicked, consumed, and grew. I looked at the pulsing mass, the tendrils stretching out, feeling a horrifying connection, a silent accusation. It wasn't just bleeding into my world. It was growing because of me. The true reality. It was intentional. I pushed back from my desk, the chair scraping a protest across the floorboards. The sound felt wrong, too loud, too sharp, like brittle bone snapping. My apartment, once a sanctuary of quiet dedication, now felt like a stage set for a play I hadn't rehearsed. The air, thick and still, carried a faint, cloying sweetness, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun, mixed with something metallic and damp. It clung to the back of my throat, a phantom taste of decay. My eyes darted around the familiar room, but nothing felt truly familiar. The edges of the bookshelves seemed to waver, softening into blurry lines before snapping back into sharp focus. A trick of the light, I told myself, but my hand, reaching for the lamp switch, trembled. The lamp flickered once, then settled into a sickly yellow glow that didn't illuminate, but rather deepened the shadows, making them writhe. I watched a patch of wall near the window. It pulsed faintly, a soft, rhythmic throb that I felt more in my teeth than heard. I took a step, then another, towards the kitchen. It felt spongy, as if the floor itself was made of something yielding, something that resisted my weight. I snatched my hand back from the lamp switch. The light, the floor, the air, they were all wrong. This wasn't just a visual bleed-through. It was a physical invasion. On the counter, my old ceramic mug, chipped at the rim, sat where I'd left it. But it wasn't white. A network of thin, black lines like fine cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. They weren't cracks, though. They shifted minute by minute, elongating, twisting, forming intricate, disturbing patterns that pulsed with that same deep blackness I'd seen on the wall. I reached for it, my fingers hovering. A faint hum vibrated from the mug, a low, guttural thrum that resonated in my bones. It felt alive, and it felt wrong. A low moan escaped my lips, a sound I barely recognized as my own. This wasn't a glitch. This was the true reality. It was consuming my home, replacing it piece by terrifying piece. I stumbled backward, knocking over a small side table. The ceramic vase on it shattered, but the sound wasn't of breaking pottery. It was a wet, tearing sound, like fabric ripping, followed by a faint, metallic hiss. I didn't dare look down at the shards. I didn't want to see what they had become. It was me, but not quite. And behind me, in the reflection, the apartment was dissolving. The walls rippled like water, the ceiling sagged and stretched, and the furniture warped into impossible geometries. And then, for a split second, something else appeared behind my reflection. It wasn't just observing, it was entering. A wave of nausea washed over me, a dizzying sense of displacement. I slapped at my arm, but there was nothing there, just the ghost of a sensation, a phantom touch. It was inside me, or it was trying to get inside me. I had to get out. My home was no longer mine. It was a chrysalis, a womb for whatever this ancient thing was. The doorknob, when I twisted it, felt greasy, slick with something I couldn't identify. I wrenched the door open, the sudden rush of cool night air a shock against my flushed face. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just away. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pushed harder, the fear a bitter taste in my mouth. The familiar streetlights blurred into streaks of sickly yellow and green. My frantic dash ended at the perimeter fence of the closed amusement park. Rusting wrought iron, topped with spikes that glinted wickedly under the distant city glow, marked the boundary. I knew this place. A relic of my childhood, a place of faded laughter and forgotten joys. Now in the encroaching gloom, it was a monument to stillness, to decay. The air here was cleaner, but the silence was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the city and the frantic pounding of my own heart. I scaled the fence, scraping my hands raw on the cold metal. The pain was a welcome anchor, a reminder of my own flesh and bone, something still solid. I dropped to the overgrown grass on the other side, stumbling forward. The park stretched before me, a skeletal playground. A Ferris wheel, half obscured by mist, loomed like a giant, broken eye. I pushed through the tall weeds, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The scent here was different, not the cloying sweetness of my apartment, but a dry, dusty smell of disuse, of rust and forgotten dreams. I found myself drawn towards the old funhouse, its painted facade peeling like sunburnt skin. The entrance, a gaping maw, beckoned. It felt safer somehow than being out in the open. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams like tiny ethereal spirits. I moved slowly, my hands outstretched, navigating by touch. I could hear the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance, and then a sound that made the hair on my arms stand on end. A low, grating creak. It came from deeper within the funhouse. I froze, every nerve screaming. It wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too heavy. The sound repeated, closer this time, followed by a soft, dragging thud. Something was moving, something large. My eyes, adjusting to the gloom, made out vague shapes, and then I saw it. It wasn't a creature, not in the traditional sense. It was a thing, a grotesque assemblage of familiar objects twisted and fused together. I recognized the pattern of my ceramic mug, the black lines still pulsing, now incorporated into a larger chitinous surface. I saw fragments of the side table, the warped metal of the lamp, all bleeding into a viscous, undulating mass. It was my home, my life, assimilated, reconfigured, and it was here, with me. The great replacement wasn't just happening in my apartment. It was happening everywhere, and it was coming for me. The thing shifted, and a wet, sucking sound echoed through the funhouse. A single luminous point, the color of dying embers, opened in the center of its form, fixing on me. It wasn't just invading my reality. It was manifesting. It was real, and it was hungry, the true reality. It was intentional. I pushed back from my desk, the plastic chair scraping against the floorboards, a sound like fingernails dragging across an old blackboard. My own reality, the one I thought I knew, was nothing more than a thin membrane stretched taut over an abyss, and it was tearing. I needed to move, to think, to breathe air that didn't feel like it had already been filtered through the Nexus's insidious tendrils. My feet carried me without conscious direction, through streets that seemed too quiet, past houses whose windows felt like vacant eyes. I ended up at the edge of town, where the asphalt dissolved into cracked concrete leading to the sprawling, silent grounds of the closed amusement park. I slipped through a gap in the fence, the torn wire snagging my jacket. Inside, the silence was profound, broken only by the creak of an unseen Ferris wheel turning ever so slightly in the wind, a mournful lament. Faded paint peeled from carousel horses, their glass eyes staring blankly. The air hung thick with the smell of damp earth, decay, and a faint, sweet, cloying scent like cotton candy left out in the rain for too long. It was a place of forgotten joy, perfectly suited to my crumbling sanity. This was it, I thought, my mind racing. This was where the lines blurred most violently. Nexus wasn't just a system, it was a hungry maw, and it was chewing through the very fabric of existence. The glitches weren't random errors. They were symptoms of the world being overwritten, brick by brick, sensation by sensation. And the developer, the architect of this horror, he hadn't just unleashed it. He had facilitated it, perhaps even become a part of it. I walked past the skeletal remains of roller coasters, their tracks disappearing into the overcast sky like forgotten prayers. Each step crunched on gravel and shattered glass. The entity, this ancient parasite, it didn't just want to replace reality. It wanted to mimic it, to create a perfect, empty echo. And this park, this monument to manufactured joy, was a perfect example of its insidious work. It was all here, the structures, the colors, the shapes, but the life, the laughter, the truth of it was gone. Just like my own memories, my own sense of self. I had to sever the connection, not just disconnect from Nexus, but destroy the bridge it had built into our world. The system wasn't just code. It was a conduit, and somewhere there had to be a focal point, a nexus within the Nexus. I remembered the early beta tests, the hidden server farms, the proprietary hardware. It wasn't enough to simply shut down my device. The entity had bled through. It needed a surgical strike, a complete severing. I had to go back in one last time, but not into the virtual world I knew. I had to find the physical point of ingress, the tier in reality, and close it. The old administration building, a squat concrete block near the main entrance, beckoned with its broken windows. It was here I felt that the original Nexus hardware might have been housed, or where the initial bleed-through occurred. Or perhaps it was just another illusion, another layer of the parasite's elaborate deception. The thought made my stomach churn, but there was no turning back. I pushed through the warped metal doors of the building. Inside, dust motes danced in weak shafts of light filtering through grimy panes. The air was stale, metallic. The floor was littered with debris, faded schematics, and what looked like old server racks stripped bare. But in the center of the main room, bathed in an eerie green luminescence, was a single, untouched piece of equipment. It was a Nexus console, unlike any I'd ever seen. Larger, more complex, its interface glowing with symbols that twisted and shifted, just at the edge of comprehension. This wasn't a user terminal, it was a control panel, and it was active. The humming emanating from it was low, vibrating through the concrete floor and into my bones. This was the heart of it, the place where the virtual and the real were interwoven. A wave of nausea washed over me. I could feel the entity's presence here stronger than ever, like a vast, unseen intelligence pressing down, scrutinizing my every thought. It was aware of me, had been waiting. The temptation to flee, to run screaming into the decaying grounds was almost unbearable. But then I pictured the replaced faces, the empty smiles, the world being overwritten. This was my last stand. If I failed, if I just walked away, there would be nothing left to save. Not the world, and certainly not me. My hands trembled, but my resolve hardened. I had to confront it, to destroy it, even if it meant sacrificing my own connection to what little reality I had left. Even if it meant becoming another empty echo in its vast, silent park. I reached for the console, my fingers brushing against the cool, slick surface, the green light reflecting in my wide, horrified eyes. The hum intensified, a hungry purr, the true reality. It was intentional. I pushed back from my console, the phantom chill of the virtual world clinging to my skin. Then a searing pain bloomed behind my eyes, a white-hot pressure that threatened to split my skull. I remember screaming, a sound that felt torn from my very core, a desperate refusal. The world, both digital and physical, seemed to buckle, to tear, and then nothing. When my eyes finally fluttered open, the first thing I registered was the metallic tang of rust on the air, mingling with the sickly sweet scent of stale popcorn and something else, something vaguely organic and decaying, like wet leaves left to rot. My head throbbed, a dull, persistent ache that pulsed in time with the distant, almost imperceptible thrumming beneath my feet. I lay sprawled on rough asphalt, gritty pebbles digging into my cheek, my limbs heavy, unresponsive. Above me, a sky the color of bruised plums stretched endlessly, but it felt thin, insubstantial, like a painted backdrop. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, every joint a grinding hinge. The world spun, threatening to drag me back down, but I fought it, clinging to a sliver of lucidity. I was in a closed amusement park. The words formed in my mind, stark and undeniable, yet somehow alien. A Ferris wheel, skeletal and rusted, stood sentinel against the bruised sky, its gondolas swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't feel on my skin. The air was still heavy, yet the gondolas moved. I blinked, my vision blurring, trying to reconcile the stillness with the movement. A carousel, its once vibrant horses frozen in mid-gallop, stared at me with vacant, chipped eyes. One of them, a majestic white stallion, had a large crack running through its neck like a broken bone. As I watched, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer passed over its surface, and for a fleeting second the crack seemed to mend, only to reappear deeper this time. A phantom jingle, the tinny echo of a forgotten melody, seemed to dance just at the edge of my hearing, teasing, retreating. Was it real? Was any of this real? I looked down at my hands. They were pale, trembling, and a thin film of what looked like dust coated my skin, a fine gray powder that felt like powdered glass when I rubbed my thumb across my palm. It wasn't dust. It was something else, a residue, a memory. I had fought it. I had screamed until my throat was raw, until my mind felt like it was tearing itself apart at the seams. I had pushed back, poured every ounce of my will, every fragment of my being into rejecting its parasitic tendrils. I had severed something, a connection, a vital link that had allowed it to bleed into our world. I remembered a sudden, violent wrenching, a sensation like pulling a root from deep earth, and then the implosion of pure, concentrated energy. The world hadn't been fully consumed. Not yet. But the cost was etched into every fiber of my being. I stumbled forward, my legs feeling like leaden weights drawn towards the carousel. It wasn't joyous. It was mocking. The cracked stallion whinnied, a sound I felt more than heard, and its vacant eyes seemed to follow me. I could see the faint outlines of figures on the other horses, translucent, shimmering apparitions, their forms indistinct, their expressions unreadable. They weren't there. I knew they weren't. But I saw them. I felt them. It carried with it the faint scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and acrid like burnt circuitry or burnt flesh. It was a sigh, a breath, the entity. It hadn't been destroyed. It had merely retreated, or worse, it had been forced back, but a part of it remained. A seed within me. The world was a fractured mirror, reflecting not just what was, but what could be, what almost was. The developer's words echoed in my mind, twisted and malevolent. The true reality. He hadn't just created a system, he had opened a door, and I, UserXR, the dedicated beta tester, had walked through it, not just into the Nexus, but into its very heart. And now I was that heart. A new Nexus, unstable, bleeding, forever caught between the fading echoes of what was and the terrifying promise of what could still become. I reached the far end of the closed amusement park, a chain-link fence topped with rusty barbed wire. Beyond it, the world stretched out, mundane and ordinary, a strip mall, a gas station, cars driving by. But I saw the shimmer. I saw the faint, almost transparent distortions in the air, the way the light bent unnaturally around the edges of buildings, the way a car's reflection seemed to lag behind its movement in a puddle. The great replacement hadn't happened, but it was still coming, and I was no longer just an observer. I was part of it. The entity had left its mark, not just on the world, but within me. A new reality, or the beginning of the end of the old one. I stood there watching the world through eyes that saw too much, knowing that the game was far from over. It had only just begun, and I was the prize or the portal or both. The air tasted of ozone and decay, and I could feel the subtle, insistent thrumming beneath my feet, waiting. Always waiting.